Look at you, once again, you stand where the echoes of laughter still live. Their voices still haunt the corners of your memory, don't they? The way they mocked you, the way they looked down at you as if your struggle was entertainment. You remember the sound, that cruel music of disbelief that played every time you fell. But let me tell you something they never understood. Even a whisper in the dark can grow into thunder when it refuses to die. You were never weak. You were simply unseen like Itachi, moving through a world too blind to understand the price of vision. They laughed because they could not comprehend silence. They feared stillness because it mirrored their own noise, their own confusion. They mistook your patience for surrender, your quiet for defeat. But you were only watching, learning, waiting for the moment the storm inside you would no longer ask for permission. When they mocked you, they saw a shell. But what they didn't see was the storm crawling beneath your skin, a storm you fed with every insult, every wound, every night you spent alone wondering if they were right. They weren't. They never were. Weakness isn't when you break. Weakness is when you refuse to rise after breaking. And you rose again and again, even when no one saw it. Do you know what Itachi once said? Those who cannot acknowledge themselves will eventually fail. You lived that truth. They laughed at you because they couldn't acknowledge their own fear. Fear of seeing someone they once stepped on surpass them. You became the reflection they dreaded, calm, controlled, untouchable. The silence they mocked is now the silence that terrifies them, because they can no longer predict what you're thinking, what you're planning, or how far you've already come. I know what you felt in those nights when sleep refused to visit, when doubt became your only companion. You questioned your worth, your purpose, your strength. You wanted to scream to prove them wrong, to show them that beneath your quiet was a fire that would one day burn their laughter to ash. But you didn't scream. You stayed silent. You waited. You endured. That's what separates the loud dreamers from the silent conquerors: patience. Itachi carried the burden of silence too. He bore the weight of misunderstanding because he knew that the truth of strength is never found in noise. You, like him, understood that power doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives. They wanted you to break publicly, to prove them right. But you broke privately and rebuilt quietly. That's why they'll never understand you, because they only see the result, not the resurrection. The world teaches you to shout for attention, to chase validation, to seek applause. But you learned something different, something the loud never discover. Silence is not emptiness, it's power under control, it's chaos contained, it's the sound of transformation. When they laughed, you learned to listen to the voice inside that said, not yet, but soon. And soon is now. Every failure they celebrated, every tear they mocked, every fall they called final, you turned it into fuel. They thought your silence meant surrender, but silence was your strategy. You let them underestimate you, because in their underestimation, you found freedom. You could grow without eyes watching, build without judgment, evolve without interruption. That's the gift of being doubted: invisibility. And invisibility is a weapon. You see, true strength doesn't roar, it whispers. It whispers through discipline, through patience, through quiet acts of resilience. Itachi didn't need to prove his power to the world. He simply became it. You are doing the same. You are not chasing recognition anymore. You are becoming undeniable. And that terrifies them, because when a person no longer seeks validation, they become uncontrollable. They used to laugh at your silence, Now they can't sleep because of it. They used to call you weak. Now they avoid your eyes. Why? Because silence is unpredictable. Silence is dangerous. Silence is the sound right before something unstoppable begins. The storm you kept inside has found its voice, and it doesn't speak with words anymore. It speaks through presence, through progress, through results. Do you remember the last time they laughed? The last time they dismissed you as too quiet, too soft, too slow? Good. Keep that memory close, not as pain, but as proof. Proof that the world mocks what it fears, and it always fears what it cannot control. They wanted you to quit so they could stay comfortable. But every time you got up, every time you took one more step, you were rewriting their script. You were erasing their version of you. You don't need to tell them you've changed. They'll feel it. In your silence, in your focus, in your absence from their noise. You don't argue anymore, you don't explain. Because when power truly awakens, it doesn't need to justify its existence. You have become what they said you'd never be, not because you shouted louder, but because you refused to be silenced. Let them talk, let them gossip, let them build stories to make sense of your distance. They'll call you cold, arrogant, emotionless. That's fine. Itachi was called a traitor before he was called a hero. Misunderstanding is the tax of greatness. You pay it in solitude, but you receive the reward in legacy. Understand this: silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of control. You no longer speak to be heard, you speak to be understood. And sometimes you don't speak at all, because your growth is now your language. Your progress is your response. Every new level of discipline, every quiet morning of work, every night you choose purpose over distraction, that's the conversation now. They laughed when you were weak. Now they whisper when you enter the room. They sense something different, something they can't name. It's not arrogance, it's not pride, it's gravity. You've built a weight to your presence, the same way Itachi did. When he entered, the air changed, not because he demanded it, but because his silence carried truth. And so do you. There comes a point when silence stops being patience and becomes prophecy. You've crossed that line. You no longer wait for anyone to believe in you, because belief was always meant to be built, not borrowed. The world doesn't hand out crowns, it hands out trials. And only those who keep walking through the fire earn the right to rule it. You've stopped explaining why you disappeared, haven't you? You just left the noise. You walked away from their endless advice, their empty opinions, their fake encouragements that always ended in doubt. You stopped telling them your plans because you realized they only listened to doubt, not to dream. And in that quiet, you began to rebuild yourself, not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself inevitable. Do you know what true power sounds like? It doesn't echo, it doesn't beg, it simply exists, calm, composed, complete. That's where you are now. You no longer need to shout your worth. Your work does it for you. You no longer chase recognition. You've become the standard. The world that once ignored your efforts now tries to imitate your discipline. They once called you obsessed, but obsession is only insanity to those who have never been hungry. They don't know what it's like to crave more than comfort, to wake up with purpose gnawing at your ribs. They don't know what it's like to feel destiny pulling you somewhere no one else can see. But Itachi did. You do. You both learned that sacrifice isn't tragedy, it's transformation. Each night you stayed awake planning, learning, working while others slept. You were building a foundation beneath the surface. Every rejection was another brick. Every insult was another layer. Every moment of loneliness became your armor. Now they see you and wonder how you got here. They can't trace the path because the path was underground. You grew roots before you rose. They laughed because they thought the silence meant absence. But silence was construction. You were assembling your empire in the dark. The noise of the world couldn't hear it, but you could feel it. Every quiet morning you worked when no one noticed. Every small victory you kept to yourself. Every failure you swallowed without complaint. It all built weight. And now your silence is heavy. It presses against their comfort. It exposes their complacency. There's a strange kind of fear that spreads when someone who used to be predictable becomes unshakable. You've seen it, haven't you? The way they look at you now, cautious, measuring. They don't laugh anymore. They don't mock your focus. They whisper, trying to explain the change. They tell each other you got lucky, that maybe you were pretending all along. But deep down they know you've become what they never had the courage to attempt. And yet, you're not done. You're not finished becoming, because silence isn't the end. It's the beginning of mastery. You've learned the hardest lesson, consistency in solitude, the strength to keep going without applause, the will to train when no one is watching. The world doesn't reward effort, it rewards evolution. And you've evolved past recognition. Do you remember when you used to seek revenge? When proving them wrong was your motivation? That fire served its purpose, but now you've outgrown it. Revenge was the seed, purpose is the tree. You don't chase their approval anymore. You chase precision. You no longer burn to destroy, you burn to refine. You've turned rage into rhythm, pain into process. That's real power, when emotion becomes energy, not excuse. Itachi once said, "Self-sacrifice a nameless shinobi who protects peace within his shadow. That is a true shinobi." You've learned that lesson too. True greatness doesn't seek to be seen. It seeks to become necessary. You're not here to impress them. You're here to impact the world quietly, profoundly, permanently. The best storms don't announce themselves, they just arrive, change everything, and fade without asking for credit. And maybe that's what you are now, a storm in human form. Controlled, calculated, capable of destruction, but guided by discipline. You've learned that silence isn't retreat, it's restraint. You can shatter mountains if you wish, but you don't need to. You've learned when to strike and when to simply stand. That's what terrifies them now, not your anger, but your control. They can't understand how someone they once pitied now moves like inevitability. You walk differently now, not faster, not louder, but with gravity. Every step carries history, every look carries intent. You no longer argue because truth doesn't argue with ignorance. You simply exist, and your existence is proof enough that persistence wins. They once thought success was a celebration. You know it's a transformation. They thought greatness was loud. You know it's lonely. They thought silence was weakness. You've proven its power. The very things they mocked you for have become your weapon. Your quiet has turned to command, your patience to precision, your focus to fear. But don't mistake this for the end of your evolution. This is just the second form, the one where power meets peace. The one where you stop seeking and start shaping. The one where you look back, not with anger, but with understanding. You see now, their laughter wasn't cruelty, it was confirmation. They laughed because they saw a part of themselves that never dared to try. You became their mirror, and they couldn't handle the reflection.